Rafah is a red line, according to President Biden, not according to Prime Minister Netanyahu. But President Biden has also said, although that is a red line, he said separately, America stands with Israel. He's also called for more aid to go to Gaza. So, what else do you think President Biden needs to do to win over that more progressive bloc of voters who is voting in a protest against him?
It's interesting. I'm not sure what he can do. They're already engaged in this incredible hyperbole, calling what the Israelis are doing genocide. The Israelis are trying to take out an organized terrorist group that is embedded in a civilian population. And the Israelis, they've made mistakes. The bombing of a humanitarian food delivery group this week was just awful. But that was a mistake, and those are going to happen in war. The problem is that look at what happened just this week when Israel went into a hospital. The first time that particular hospital was invaded, and there have been several by the Israelis, the Palestinians were all over, how can you invade a hospital? How can you invade a hospital? And then it turns out they're not only tunnels for the terrorists underneath the hospital, which the hospital administrators and everybody else had to know were dug there, but there were 200 Hamas fighters captured in the Al-Shifa hospital this week. So in other words, they're using these civilian structures and neighborhoods for self-protection. And if the Israelis are going, no matter how much the Biden administration tries to stop the Israelis, I think at this point the Israelis who've been fighting since October the 7th are going to say, we're just too deeply committed. We've lost too many people. We can't live in southern Israel. And now because of the bombing by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon, we can't live in northern Israel. We really have to deal with this if we're to have a country. And I don't think that there's much that the Americans can really do to change that in fundamental ways.
So, is what you're saying, aside from President Biden calling for a permanent ceasefire, there's really nothing he can do to assuage these more progressive voters who are voting against him in protest?
I think he can signal to them that he's very sympathetic to them. And I think a lot of what he's doing with respect to Israel is a signaling to them. But I think it goes, when you have a UN vote in which the U.S. abstains, the Israelis are not more persuaded by that, they're more angered by that. What I think surprised the whole world, which had seen so many protests in Israel against Netanyahu, the country seemed very divided, as America is now divided, right? But if you get a 9/11 type attack, Americans unite, right? We united. After a while, that unity breaks up. You get into a war in Afghanistan and so forth, and then people begin to break off. Time passes. But the Israelis are united, not so much around Netanyahu, but around fighting this war. And there's a war cabinet, just as there was in England during World War II. It wasn't just Churchill. Labour, led by Clement Attlee, who led the government after the war, right, when Churchill was defeated, he was in the cabinet during World War II in England. So that's the kind of cabinet the Israelis have now. They have big internal questions, including whether to draft the hyper-religious, the so-called Hasidim, who have never been in the military and who don't want their children to go into the military, not, I think, because they're fearful that the children will be killed, but because it's a closed community. How are you going to get them back on the farm after they've seen Paris? right? After they've gone into the military, they may leave that sect entirely. So there are big disputes in Israel, but not, I think, disputes about whether to go into Rafah, and I think what to do about Hezbollah in the north, which they won't do until they have really essentially solved the problem in the south in Gaza.
I do now want to pivot to former President Donald Trump, who last night saw a victory in his own right, easily taking the Wisconsin primary. But Nikki Haley, who did drop out of the race last month, won 12.8% of the vote. Is this a troubling sign for the former president?
Yes, but as I mentioned before about Biden has the 7-10 split. The split for Trump is closer to two pins that are next to each other, because he needs to pick up her votes, the Nikki Haley votes. He simply needs to appeal more to the center. But he has a different problem, I think, with many of them. There are plenty of people who will not vote for Trump because of what they see as either his abrasive personality, not his policies, but his abrasive personality, and what they think was a danger to democracy when he failed to acknowledge his defeat in the last election. They may not think he was guilty of the charges about taking over the Capitol on January the 6th. He was never charged with that, and so forth. But they don't like the fact that he still doesn't acknowledge his defeat. Now, he's not the first one. Stacey Abrams never acknowledged that she was defeated in the Georgia gubernatorial election. But this is a president of the United States, and he is still saying that he was not defeated. And therefore, you have people who are reluctant to vote for him because they're concerned about either his personality or the continuity of democracy. And there are some people who are concerned about that on the Democratic side as well. So not just about Trump, but they're concerned about Democrats who seem to be wanting to put Trump in jail and keep him off the ballot. That doesn't look very democratic either. So what I take from that, Brittany, is that there are deep challenges to our democracy that come from both sides, and that are probably greater right now than they have been in recent years.